Welcome, dear listeners, to this enchanting audiobook rendition of Miss Marple and the Snowy Death Conspiracy, a cozy mystery in the timeless style of Agatha Christie. Join the sharp-witted Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a chilling puzzle in the quaint village of St. Mary Mead. Settle in with a cup of tea and let the tale transport you to a world of subtle clues and village charm. Now, let the story begin. Chapter 1. The Village in Winter's Grip. In the winter of 1952, the quaint village of St. Mary Mead nestled peacefully in the English countryside, its timeless charm amplified by a generous dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. The thatched roofs of the cottages gleamed like frosted cakes under the pale December sun, and the winding lanes, usually bustling with villagers on their daily errands, were now hushed and pristine, save for the occasional crunch of boots or the distant laughter of children building snowmen on the green. Chimneys puffed lazy curls of smoke into the crisp air, carrying the comforting sense of burning logs and baking bread, while the church spire rose sentinel-like against the leaden sky, a reminder of the community's enduring spirit. It was a scene of idyllic serenity, the kind that warmed the heart even as the cold nipped at one's fingers. But beneath this picturesque facade, the seeds of mystery were quietly taking root. At the heart of the village stood the vicarage, a rambling Georgian house with ivy-clad walls that whispered of centuries past. Its mullioned windows, now etched with delicate patterns of frost, overlooked a garden blanketed in white, where holly bushes bore their red berries like jewels in a crown. The vicarage was abuzz with preparations for the annual Christmas charity tea, an event that brought the community together in the spirit of giving, raising funds for the war memorial that honoured the village's fallen sons from the recent conflicts. The Reverend Leonard Clement, a kindly gentleman in his 50s with a balding pate that shone like polished mahogany and a gentle smile that put even the most troubled souls at ease, oversaw the arrangements with his characteristic quiet efficiency. His wife, Griselda, a vivacious woman in her 30s with a mop of unruly curls and an infectious laugh, flitted about the drawing room, arranging trays of mince pies, scones slathered in clotted cream, and jugs of elderberry wine that promised to chase away the winter chill. Among the invited guests was Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster who resided at Charing Cottage, a cosy abode at the edge of the village. With her fluffy white hair pinned neatly under a sensible hat, her twinkling blue eyes that missed nothing, and a figure wrapped in layers of woolen shawls against the cold, Miss Marple embodied the archetype of the unassuming village lady. Yet, those who knew her well understood that her mind was a repository of keen observations, sharpened by years of watching the world from her sitting room window. She knitted intricate patterns, scarves, mittens, and the like, not merely for charity, but as a meditative exercise that allowed her thoughts to wander through the labyrinths of human behaviour. "People are much the same everywhere, my dear," she would say to her young maid Cherry, a bright girl from the city who had taken up service in the village. "Whether in the glamour of London or the quiet of St. Mary Mead, the heart reveals itself in the smallest details, a glance, a hesitation, a misplaced word." On this particular afternoon, Miss Marple made her way to the vicarage, her sturdy boots leaving neat imprints in the snow. The path wound past the village green, where a group of children tossed snowballs with gleeful abandon, their rosy cheeks and muffled giggles a testament to the season's joys. She paused briefly to exchange pleasantries with Mrs. Price Ridley, the village gossip, who was sweeping her doorstep with vigorous strokes, Dreadful weather, isn't it, Miss Marple? But the charity tea will warm us all. I hear Colonel Haydock has been most generous again." Miss Marple nodded agreeably, noting the woman's eager eyes, always hungry for tidbits to share over garden fences. Upon arriving at the vicarage, Miss Marple was ushered into the drawing room, where a roaring fire crackled merrily in the grate, casting a golden glow over the assembled company. The room was adorned with sprigs of holly and mistletoe, and the air hummed with the soft murmur of conversation. Colonel Arthur Haydock, the village squire and host of many a local event, held court near the fireplace. A bluff, retired military man in his 60s, with a ruddy complexion weathered by years in India, a booming laugh that echoed off the walls, and a moustache that bristled like a well-drilled regiment. The colonel was known for his philanthropy. He had donated handsomely to the War Memorial Fund, a cause close to his heart, having lost a nephew in the trenches of Normandy. Seated beside him was his niece, Miss Amelia Fortescue, a pretty young woman of 25 who had recently arrived from London to spend the holidays. With her auburn hair styled in fashionable waves, a determined chin that spoke of modern independence, and eyes that sparkled with urban sophistication, Amelia brought a touch of glamour to the provincial gathering. She chatted animatedly about the latest West End shows, but Miss Marple observed a subtle tension in her posture, as if she carried unspoken worries beneath her polished exterior. Dr. Geoffrey Sanford, the local physician, stood by the window, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles as he quoted a Latin phrase to no one in particular. A scholarly fellow in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and a habit of pontificating on matters medical and philosophical, he was respected for his dedication to the village's health. Yet, Miss Marple noted his fingers drumming idly on his pocket watch, a sign, perhaps, of inner restlessness. Mr. Harold Pettigrew, the portly village shopkeeper, hovered near the refreshment table, his shrewd eyes appraising the spread. With a round face framed by spectacles and a belly that strained against his waistcoat, he was a man of business acumen, always ready with a bargain or a bit of local news. "Trade's been brisk with the holidays," he remarked to Griselda, though Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease when the conversation turned to the charity fund. Lastly, old Mr. Josiah Briggs, the gardener at the colonel's manor, lingered in a corner, his grizzled hair and war-worn limp marking him as a veteran of the Great War. Gruff in manner, with hands calloused from years of tilling soil, he spoke little but observed much, his eyes narrowing as he sipped his tea. As the group settled into easy chatter, trays of delicacies circulated. "This snow is a true blessing for the children," Griselda exclaimed, her curls bouncing as she passed a plate of scones. "They'll be sledging on Miller's Hill all afternoon, mark my words." Colonel Haydock chuckled heartily, his ruddy cheeks flushing with mirth. "Indeed, my dear, but it's a devil for the older bones like mine. Still, our War Memorial Fund is thriving, thanks to the generosity of all here." His twinkling eyes swept the room, but Miss Marple, sipping her tea with delicate precision, noted a fleeting shadow cross the vicar's face, as if a cloud had passed over the sun. Miss Amelia smiled politely, her auburn locks catching the firelight. "Uncle, you're far too modest. Your donation was the largest by far, and well deserved for such a noble cause." Dr. Sanford nodded sagely, pushing his spectacles up his nose. "Charity binds the community, as Virgil so aptly put it. Omnia vincit amor. Love conquers all." Mr. Pettigrew, helping himself to a mince pie, interjected with a sly grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Aye, But some bindings are tighter than others, eh? Business has been slow with this weather. Folks hunkering down indoors, not venturing to the shop. Old Briggs grunted from his corner, his gruff voice cutting through the politeness like a spade through soil. Snow hides a multitude of sins, it does. Covers tracks, but not forever. The conversation meandered on, touching on village matters, the upcoming carol service, the state of the roads, the health of elderly Mrs. Weatherby. Miss Marple listened attentively, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically in her lap, each stitch a thread in the tapestry of observations she wove. She noted how the Colonel favoured the hot chocolate over the elderberry wine, how the vicar prepared it himself with a solicitous hand, how Pettigrew's gaze lingered on the collection box for the fund. As twilight descended, painting the sky in hues of lavender and grey, the gathering began to disperse. Colonel Haydock rose, buttoning his greatcoat against the cold. "A splendid afternoon, Reverend. I'll see you all at the memorial unveiling next week." With farewells exchanged, he trudged out into the snow, his sturdy figure soon swallowed by the gathering dusk. But the next morning, as the village awoke to a fresh layer of frost, tragedy shattered the peace. Old Briggs, arriving early at the manor to clear paths, discovered the Colonel's body in a snowy drift near the gate, his face peaceful as if in slumber, but cold and lifeless. Word spread like wildfire through the lanes, villagers clustering in hushed groups. Dr. Sanford was summoned, pronouncing it a heart attack exacerbated by exposure, a natural end for a man of his years. Miss Marple, informed by a wide-eyed Cherry over breakfast, set down her knitting with a thoughtful sigh. Poor Colonel Haydock, such a vital man gone so suddenly. But one must wonder, my dear, why did he venture out alone in that bitter night, and with the charity tea so fresh in mind? People do not always reveal the whole truth, even to themselves. As the snow continued to fall softly outside her window, Miss Marple's blue eyes gleamed with quiet determination. The village's cosy facade had cracked, and she sensed the threads of a deeper conspiracy beginning to unravel. Chapter 2. Whispers Among the Snowflakes. The day following Colonel Arthur Haydock's untimely demise dawned crisp and unforgiving over St. Mary Mead, the sky a vast expanse of unrelenting grey that seemed to press down upon the village like a heavy quilt. Fresh snowflakes danced lazily in the air, settling upon the rooftops and hedgerows, muffling the world in a hush that amplified every whisper of sorrow. The villagers, accustomed to the rhythms of rural life, where tragedies were met with stoic resilience, gathered in subdued clusters outside their cottages, their breaths forming misty clouds as they exchanged hushed condolences. The church bells tolled mournfully, calling the community to the small stone church, where the funeral service for the Colonel would be held, a simple affair, befitting a man who had lived with unpretentious generosity. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her warmest shawl and a sturdy coat that had seen many winters, made her way along the slippery path to the church. Her steps were deliberate, her blue eyes scanning the snowy landscape with the quiet acuity that had solved more puzzles than the village cared to remember. Cherry, her maid, had fussed over her that morning, insisting on an extra layer of woolens. "It's bitter out, Miss Marple. You don't want to catch your death." Miss Marple had smiled gently. "Death comes in many guises, my dear, but I shall be careful." The church was filled with the scent of beeswax candles and evergreen boughs, arranged tastefully around the simple oak casket that held the Colonel's remains. Pews creaked under the weight of mourners, their faces etched with genuine grief. For Colonel Haydock had been a beloved figure, always ready with a kind word or a charitable deed. The Reverend Leonard Clement stood at the pulpit, his balding head bowed in prayer, his voice steady as he delivered the eulogy. "Colonel Haydock was a pillar of our little community," he intoned, his gentle smile flickering briefly. "A man of honour, who gave selflessly to our War Memorial Fund and to the hearts of all who knew him." Miss Marple, seated in her usual pew near the back, noted how the vicar's hands clasped the lectern a tad too tightly, his knuckles whitening as if anchoring himself against an inner tide. As the service progressed, with hymns sung in quavering voices and readings from Scripture that spoke of eternal peace, Miss Marple's gaze wandered discreetly over the congregation. Miss Amelia Fortescue, the Colonel's niece, sat in the front row, her auburn hair veiled under a black hat, her posture erect and her grief composed, perhaps a touch too rehearsed, as if practiced before a mirror. Tears glistened in her eyes, but they did not fall, and Miss Marple recalled how young women from London often schooled their emotions with urban sophistication. Beside her, Dr. Geoffrey Sanford fidgeted with his pocket watch, twisting the chain absently, his scholarly brow furrowed. His wire-rimmed spectacles caught the candlelight, and Miss Marple wondered at his unease. Doctors, after all, were accustomed to death. Mr. Harold Pettigrew occupied a seat near the aisle, his portly frame squeezed into a sombre suit that strained at the seams. His shrewd eyes darted about, avoiding direct contact with others, and when the vicar mentioned the charity fund, a faint flush crept up his round cheeks. Old Mr. Josiah Briggs lurked at the rear, his grizzled features set in a scowl, his limp more pronounced in the cold. He muttered under his breath during the prayers, something about ungrateful masters that carried just far enough for Miss Marple's sharp ears to catch. The Reverend's wife, Griselda, moved among the mourners after the service, offering quiet words of comfort, her curls subdued under a modest hat, but her infectious energy dimmed by the occasion. As the congregation filed out into the churchyard, where the snow lay like a pristine shroud over the gravestones, Miss Marple lingered, exchanging nods with villagers. "Such a shock," murmured Mrs. Price Ridley, her gossip's eyes alight with barely contained curiosity. "Found in that drift. Heart gave out, they say. But why out in the night?" Miss Marple replied mildly. "Indeed, one wonders. The Colonel was not one for reckless wanderings." Later that afternoon, with the snowflakes thickening into a gentle flurry, Miss Marple paid a visit to her old friend Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall, the grandest house in the village. Dolly, a robust woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense air and a penchant for dramatic tales, welcomed her with open arms and a steaming pot of tea in the drawing-room. The fire roared cheerfully, casting a warm glow over the chintz armchairs and the silver tray laden with buttered crumpets. "Jane, my dear, come in out of that beastly cold. Poor Colonel Haydock. It's all so dreadfully sad. Arthur's away in London, but he sent condolences." Miss Marple settled into a chair, accepting a cup with thanks. "Yes, Dolly, a great loss. The doctor attributes it to natural causes. A heart attack followed by exposure in the snow." She sipped delicately, her eyes twinkling over the rim. But doctors, wise as they are, sometimes overlook the human element. I recall a case from my girlhood in the village. A man who froze after partaking of a tainted beverage at a winter fete. Dolly leaned forward, her eyes widening with intrigue. "You don't mean foul play? Here in St. Mary Mead? Oh, Jane, you're incorrigible. But do tell, what makes you suspect?" "Merely observing, my dear," Miss Marple replied with her customary modesty. At the charity tea, the Colonel mentioned auditing the War Memorial Fund, hinting at discrepancies. Funds can stir passions, you know. People embezzle for the noblest reasons sometimes, or out of desperation. Dolly poured more tea, her mind racing. The fund, Reverend Clement manages it, doesn't he? And the Colonel was quite involved. But surely not. As the conversation meandered, Miss Marple steered it gently toward the suspects. Miss Amelia seemed composed at the funeral. Inheritance, perhaps. Young women today are so independent. Dolly nodded. She's to inherit the manor, I hear. And Dr. Sanford, fidgety chap today. Gambling debts, rumour has it. Lost a packet at the races last summer. That evening, as the snow continued its soft descent, blanketing the village in whispers of white, Miss Marple ventured out once more, her shawl pulled tight. The lanes were illuminated by the warm glow from cottage windows where families gathered for supper. She encountered Dr. Sanford near the surgery, his coat dusted with flakes. "A tragic loss, Doctor," she said mildly, falling into step beside him. "Indeed, Miss Marple," he replied, his voice measured. His heart was weak. I'd prescribed rest and digitalis for palpitations. The cold must have overwhelmed him. But his eyes darted away, and Miss Marple noted one of his gloves bore a faint, dark stain. Not blood, but perhaps something from his dispensary. "You attended the tea. Did the Colonel seem unwell?" she inquired innocently. "Not at all," he assured, a touch too quickly, jolly as ever. They parted at the crossroads, and Miss Marple continued to the village shop, where Mr. Pettigrew was closing up, his portly silhouette framed in the doorway. "Evening, Miss Marple. Dreadful business with the Colonel." His shrewd eyes narrowed. He owed a small sum on his account. Nothing serious, mind. But rivalries. Nonsense. My shop thrives on fair trade. She purchased a tin of biscuits, probing gently. "The charity fund must be a boon for business. Donations through receipts, I suppose." Pettigrew flushed slightly. "Aye, all above board." Miss Amelia, encountered on her way back from the manor, confided over a brief chat in the snowy lane. Uncle was changing his will, something about the fund irregularities. He promised me security, but now... Her determined chin quivered, but her eyes held a calculating gleam. Old Briggs, shoveling a path near the manor gate, grumbled when approached. "Master sacked me last week, called me lazy after 30 years' service. Ungrateful, that's what." His gruff voice carried resentment, his calloused hands gripping the spade like a weapon. Returning to Charing Cottage, where Cherry had a fire blazing and supper waiting, Miss Marple shed her outdoor layers with a sigh. "Clues are like snowflakes, Cherry, each unique, and they melt away if not gathered swiftly. Motives flutter about. Embezzlement from the fund, perhaps for church repairs or personal debts. Inheritance for the niece. Professional rivalries for the shopkeeper. Medical oversights for the doctor. And a deep grudge for the gardener." Cherry set down a bowl of soup. "Sounds complicated, miss, but you'll sort it. You always do." Miss Marple smiled, picking up her knitting. "Human nature is predictable, my dear. Like patterns in lace, pull one thread, and the design emerges." Outside, the snow whispered on, hiding tracks, but not the truths buried beneath. Chapter 3. Hidden tracks in the frost. The snow fell anew that night, not in the lazy drifts of the previous days, but in a determined veil that sought to erase every blemish from the village landscape. By morning, St. Mary Mead lay pristine once more, the paths trodden smooth, the gardens muffled under fresh white quilts. Yet Miss Jane Marple, rising early, as was her habit, peered through her lace curtains and saw not serenity, but opportunity lost. Footprints, those telltale whispers of human passage, had been obliterated. Nature is a fickle ally, she murmured to Cherry, who was stoking the fire in the grate. But it cannot hide everything, not from one who knows where to look. Miss Marple had passed a restless evening, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome as she turned over the fragments of the puzzle in her mind. The Colonel's death, exposure following a heart attack, Dr. Sanford had pronounced with professional certainty. Yet the timing nagged at her. Why had the Colonel, a man of robust habits despite his years, ventured out into the deepening dusk after the charity tea, and alone? He had spoken of returning directly to the manor, a mere quarter-mile through the lanes. Briggs, the gardener, had found him at first light, crumpled in a drift by the gate, his face peaceful in repose, as if sleep had claimed him mid-stride. People do not simply lie down in snow and die without a push, Miss Marple confided to her reflection in the mirror as she pinned her fluffy white hair beneath a sensible woolen hat. No, there is more here than meets the eye, and I shall invite the eyes to tea. By midday, invitations had been dispatched, simple cards in her neat looping script, summoning the vicar, the doctor, Miss Amelia, Mr. Pettigrew, and even old Briggs, though she doubted the latter would accept, to Charing Cottage for a modest afternoon gathering. In memory of the Colonel, she had written, and to share our grief in these trying times. Cherry bustled about with trays of scones still warm from the oven, clotted cream, and her special damson jam, while the kettle sang on the hob. Reverend Leonard Clement arrived first, stamping snow from his boots on the mat. He was a picture of clerical propriety in his black coat and starched collar, though Miss Marple noted the frayed edges of his cuffs, unusual for a man who prided himself on modest neatness. "How kind of you, Miss Marple," he said, accepting a cup of Earl Grey with a biscuit. "These gatherings do lift the spirits. The fund, well, the War Memorial Fund progresses despite the loss. The Colonel was its staunchest supporter." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied mildly, her blue eyes twinkling over the rim of her teacup. "He mentioned auditing the accounts only last week. Such dedication. Tell me, Reverend, were there any irregularities he brought to your attention?" The vicar's hand paused mid-air, the biscuit crumbling slightly between his fingers. "Irregularities? Oh, nothing of note. A misplaced shilling here or there. Village contributions can be haphazard, but all is in order now." His smile was gentle, but Miss Marple observed the slight tremor in his voice, like a leaf quivering in an unseen breeze. Dr. Geoffrey Sanford followed shortly after, shaking snow from his umbrella with a flourish. His wire-rimmed spectacles were fogged from the cold, and he polished them absently on a handkerchief. "Miss Marple, you are a beacon in this wintry gloom. Your garden must be a sight come spring, though now it's quite buried, eh?" He chuckled at his own jest, but his eyes darted to the window, as if expecting phantoms in the flakes. "You see much from windows, Doctor," Miss Marple observed, pouring his tea strong and black, as he preferred. "The manor gate is visible from the vicarage path, I believe. Did you happen to notice the Colonel on his way home that evening?" Sanford adjusted his tie, a nervous habit she had noted before. "Alas, no. I left the tea early. House calls, you know. The Colonel's heart was a concern. I had warned him against overexertion. Tragic, but inevitable." Yet as he sipped, Miss Marple's gaze fell upon his gloves, laid neatly on the side table. One bore a faint stain, dark, irregular. Ink, perhaps, or something more sinister. Miss Amelia Fortescue, arrived in a flurry of auburn curls and fur-trimmed coat, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Aunt Jane, may I call you that? Uncle always spoke so fondly of you." She unpinned her brooch, a handsome cameo that caught the firelight, newly polished, Miss Marple thought, for it gleamed with unnatural vigour. This was his last gift to me. He promised so much more in his will, but now... Well, the snow claims all, doesn't it? "Promises are like snowflakes, my dear," Miss Marple said softly. "Beautiful, but fleeting unless preserved. You were close to your uncle." "Oh yes, though he could be stern. He mentioned changing his will, something about the fund eating into the estate. But I assured him, family first." Her determined chin lifted, but her eyes held a shadow of uncertainty. Mr. Harold Pettigrew bustled in next, bearing a jar of his homemade chutney as a peace offering. "Thought this might cheer the table, Miss Marple. Village talk says the Colonel and the Vicar had words over the funds. Argued right there at the tea, they did." He winked slyly, his portly frame settling into the armchair with a creak. "But what's a bit of disagreement among friends, eh?" Miss Marple accepted the jar with thanks, noting the label in Pettigrew's bold hand. "Gossip is the spice of village life, Mr. Pettigrew, but facts are the meat. The Colonel favoured hot chocolate that evening, I recall, not the elderberry wine. Prepared by the Vicar himself, was it not?" Pettigrew nodded vigorously. "Aye, steaming mug of it. Colonel said the wine gave him indigestion, more for the rest of us." His grin was broad, but Miss Marple detected a calculation behind it, like a shopkeeper tallying profits. Old Josiah Briggs did not come indoors, but Miss Marple spied him through the window, lurking by the hedge with his shovel, his grizzled face peering in. She stepped out briefly, the cold nipping at her nose. "Mr. Briggs, won't you join us? A cup of tea to warm the bones." He grunted, leaning on his tool. "No time for chit-chat, miss. Snow don't shovel itself. Master sacked me fair and square, said I was slacking, after 30 years tending his roses. But I found him, didn't I? Cold as ice by the gate." His limp was pronounced as he shifted, and his eyes, sharp beneath bushy brows, held a grudge as deep as the drifts. Back inside, the conversation meandered like the village lanes. "The elderberry wine was most delightful," Miss Marple remarked innocently, passing the scones. Though the Colonel abstained, did anyone notice him partaking of anything else unusual? Heads shook in unison. Reverend Clement with a polite murmur, Dr. Sanford adjusting his glasses, Miss Amelia dabbing her lips with a napkin, Pettigrew helping himself to another biscuit. Yet Miss Marple's mind raced. The hot chocolate, thick, comforting, prepared in the vicarage kitchen. Who had access? And the body, found at dawn. The snow that night had been light, footprints should have lingered. As the guest departed into the fading light, Miss Marple lingered by the fire with Cherry. "Clues are like hidden tracks in the frost, my dear. They gleam if you know the angle of the light." The next morning, undeterred by a fresh dusting of snow, Miss Marple donned her stout boots and trudged to the manor gate. The site of the tragedy was marked now by a wilted wreath, but she knelt carefully, brushing snow aside with her gloved hand. There, faint indentations, irregular, as if someone had dragged a heel or brushed with a branch to obscure. Not the Colonel's purposeful stride, nor Briggs's limping gait. And nearby, a curious depression, round and deep, like a mug pressed into the snow. Timelines, she mused aloud, though no one was there to hear. The Colonel left at dusk, say 5 o'clock, body found at 7, 12 hours unaccounted. In that cold, exposure would claim a man swiftly, but not instantly. And why no cry for help? Returning home, she pondered the motives anew, listing them as neatly as her knitting patterns. The vicar, perhaps dipping into the fund for church repairs. His frayed cuffs spoke of strain. The doctor, debts whispered in the village. His stained glove. Miss Amelia, inheritance at stake. Pettigrew, business rivalries. The colonel had threatened to take his custom elsewhere. Briggs, the grudge of dismissal. Human hearts leave tracks too, she told Cherry that evening, as the fire popped and the snow whispered against the panes. Deeper than any boot print, and one set leads straight to murder. Yet red herrings abounded, like foxes in the wood. Village gossip placed Miss Amelia near the manor that night, collecting holly for decorations, it transpired, witnessed by the postman. Dr. Sanford's stain, merely ink from scrawling prescriptions in haste, and the tampered tracks, perhaps only the wind's mischief. Miss Marple set down her needles, her eyes sharp. No, the truth is there, buried but not lost. We must dig gently, lest it melt away. Chapter 4. The thaw begins. The thaw arrived with the stealth of a housebreaker. Overnight, the temperature climbed a grudging degree or two, and by breakfast, the gutters of Charing Cottage ran with black water. Miss Marple watched the drops from her kitchen window, each plink against the sill a small confession. Snow that had hidden sins was now betraying them, sliding from roofs in heavy slabs, exposing the raw earth beneath. Nothing stays buried forever, she told Cherry, who was buttering toast with more vigor than necessary. Not footprints, not secrets. Cherry, flour on her apron and curiosity in her eyes, ventured, "Will you tell the police, miss, about the tracks and the mug print?" Miss Marple smiled the small, private smile she reserved for the young. "Inspector Craddock is a capable man, but he is in Tunbridge Wells until tomorrow. Besides, the ground must be prepared. One does not plant seeds in frozen soil." She folded her napkin with precision. "Today I shall cultivate." Her first call was at Gossington Hall, where Dolly Bantry received her in the morning room, amid the scent of damp dogs and hyacinths forced early in the conservatory. Dolly, wrapped in a peach silk dressing gown despite the hour, poured coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "You look like a cat who has cornered the cream," Dolly observed. "Out with it, Jane." Miss Marple accepted. The cup. "The colonel was poisoned, Dolly. Digitalis, I believe, derived from foxgloves. The vicarage garden is full of them, even under snow. A lethal dose in hot chocolate would slow the heart within minutes, mimic a seizure, and leave the victim insensible, but not immediately dead. The body was then carried, or dragged, a short distance, and arranged in the drift to suggest exposure." Dolly's cup rattled in its saucer. Good heavens, and the murderer? Still taking shape, like a figure in the mist, but I have invited Sir Henry Clithering for luncheon. He is motoring down from Scotland Yard, ostensibly to discuss his memoirs, in truth to lend official weight once the ground is soft enough. Sir Henry arrived at 12:30 in a black Humber that scattered slush across the lane. He was a tall, lean man with a guardsman's moustache now silvered and eyes that missed nothing. Cherry served them in the parlour. Clear soup, poached sole, and a bottle of hock Sir Henry produced from his travelling case. Over the fish, Miss Marple laid out her findings with the neatness of a bridge hand. "Timeline," she began. "Colonel leaves vicarage at 5:15, dusk falling. Briggs locks the manor gate at 6. He swears it was undisturbed. Body discovered by Briggs at 7 the following morning, rigid, face composed, hands unclenched. Rigour in that cold would set rapidly. yet the limbs were not contracted as in a true cardiac collapse. Someone posed him. Sir Henry dabbed his lips. Poison? Digitalis. Symptoms: nausea, slowed pulse, visual disturbance, yellow halos, the textbooks say. The Colonel complained of blurred hedges to Griselda as he left. I thought it the snow. Now I think otherwise. Source: foxgloves in the vicarage border. Dried seed pods keep their potency. A teaspoon steeped in hot water, added to chocolate, would be tasteless beneath the cocoa and sugar. Sir Henry leaned back. Suspects? Miss Marple counted on her fingers, each digit a small indictment. Reverend Clement embezzled the memorial fund to repair the church tower, 127 missing, according to the Colonel's private ledger, which I borrowed from the manor study this morning. Confronted privately 2 days before the tea. Dr. Sanford. Gambling debts in town. The Colonel held his IOUs, threatened exposure. Miss Amelia Fortescue stood to inherit the manor, but the Colonel had begun rewriting his will, diverting the bulk to the fund. She knew. Mr. Pettigrew. The Colonel discovered he was siphoning donations through inflated invoices for shop goods sold to the committee, a quiet partnership with a London wholesaler. Old Briggs, sacked without notice for pilfering plants, actually taking cuttings for his sick wife's window box, a lifetime's loyalty overturned. Sir Henry whistled softly. Motive enough for a regiment. Precisely. Yet only one hand stirred the cup. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Observe the red herrings, Sir Henry, for they point the way. Miss Amelia was indeed seen near the manor, collecting holly with the postman at 6:30, witnessed. Dr. Sanford's stained glove, indigo ink from copying a prescription for Mrs. Price's rheumatism. I checked the bottle. Briggs's grudge is real, but he was at the Red Lion from 7 until closing, corroborated by half the darts team. Sir Henry raised an eyebrow. Process of elimination. Partly, but clues remain. The mug print in the snow beside the body, too small for the Colonel's own, too deep for a casual drop. Someone set it down deliberately while arranging the scene. And the vicarage kitchen. 1 cup missing from the tray Griselda washed that night. She noticed, thought it broken. Sir Henry drained his glass. The vicar prepared the chocolate. He did. Yet he is not the poisoner. Watch. Miss Marple produced a folded sheet, photostated pages from the Colonel's ledger. Clement's embezzlement is penciled in the Colonel's hand with a note. Discuss with LC privately. Restitution possible. The Colonel intended mercy. Clement had confessed to Griselda the night before. She told me in confidence this morning, tears in her eyes. He is a thief, Sir Henry, but not a murderer. The baronet steepled his fingers. Then who carried the cup from kitchen to snow? Miss Marple rose, moving to the window where the thaw had stripped the yew hedge bare. Someone who knew the Colonel's habits intimately. Someone present at the tea, free to move between drawing room and kitchen unnoticed. Someone whose jar of damson preserves, gift-wrapped for my table yesterday, contained traces of digitalis seeds when I decanted a spoonful this morning. Careless, or perhaps deliberate arrogance. Sir Henry's eyes narrowed. Pettigrew. Precisely. The shopkeeper. His invoices show purchases of foxglove extract, labelled as rat bait, from the London wholesaler. The Colonel confronted him the day before the tea. Pettigrew's ledger balances only if the fund is robbed blind. He slipped the infusion into the chocolate while the vicar was fetching biscuits. Later, when the Colonel stepped out, Pettigrew followed under cover of darkness, caught him as the poison took hold, dragged the body the final yards, and arranged the scene. The mug he pressed into the snow to suggest the colonel had carried it himself and dropped it in distress. But the footprints, brushed with a holly branch, Amelia's discarded bundle found in the hedge this morning. Pettigrew retrieved it to obscure his tracks, not knowing it would later exonerate her. Sir Henry stood. "We have enough for an arrest?" "Almost. One final test." Miss Marple opened a small tin on the mantel. Inside lay a single damson preserve, dark and glossy. Cherry photographed the jar before I tampered. The seeds float, to the top when stirred. Digitalis residue clings. I have sent a sample to the county analyst by the first post. Sir Henry smiled grimly. "Then let us pay a call on Mr. Pettigrew before the thaw washes the last evidence away." They motored to the village shop in Sir Henry's Humber, the lanes now rivers of meltwater. Pettigrew was behind the counter, polishing jars with a cloth that trembled slightly. The bell above the door gave its familiar jangle. "Afternoon, sir, miss," he began, then faltered as Sir Henry produced his warrant card. "Harold Pettigrew, I am arresting you for the murder of Colonel Arthur Haydock." Pettigrew's cloth dropped. Murder? It was his heart. Ask the doctor. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but inexorable. "The doctor will testify the heart was slowed by digitalis, not disease. Your preserve jar, Mr. Pettigrew, contains the same poison. Your footprints, partially brushed, match the spacing of your boots, which Cherry measured yesterday when you called, and the Colonel's ledger names you as the embezzler he intended to expose at the next committee meeting." Pettigrew's face crumpled like wet paper. He'd have ruined me. The shop, my reputation, everything. I only meant to make him ill, scare him into silence. The dose. I miscalculated. Sir Henry snapped cuffs gently about the shopkeeper's wrists. Outside, the thaw had stripped the village bare. Roofs steamed in the weak sun, and the war memorial stood stark against the sky, its stone angels dripping like mourners. Back at Charing Cottage, Miss Marple poured tea for Sir Henry, while Cherry cleared the luncheon things. "A conspiracy of greed," she said softly, "unravelled by a cup of chocolate and a jar of jam." Sir Henry raised his cup in salute. "To the gentlest detective in England." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Merely an observer of human nature, Sir Henry. And nature, like snow, always reveals its secrets in the thaw." Chapter 5. The Gentle Unmasking. The vicarage drawing-room had never looked so naked. The thaw had stripped the garden to black earth and sodden leaves. Through the tall windows, the sky was a rinsed blue, and every pane of glass threw back the faces of the assembled company with merciless candour. Griselda had opened the French doors to air the room, and the faint smell of wet box hedge drifted in, mingling with the beeswax polish and the ghost of elderberry wine. They were all present, seated in a loose circle as though for a reading of the will. Reverend Clement stood by the mantel, hands clasped behind his back, the frayed cuffs now painfully obvious. Dr. Sanford sat forward on the edge of a tapestry chair, spectacles glinting. Miss Amelia Fortescue had chosen the window seat, her auburn hair catching the light like polished chestnut. She twisted a handkerchief, but her eyes were dry. Mr. Pettigrew occupied the largest armchair, his shopkeeper's apron replaced by a Sunday suit that strained across the stomach. He had been fetched from the police station under Sir Henry's authority, wrists uncuffed but flanked by a silent constable. Old Briggs hovered near the door, cap in hand, his limp more pronounced on the warmed rug. Miss Marple entered last, leaning lightly on Cherry's arm. She wore dove grey wool and the cameo brooch Amelia had admired at tea. Her white hair was pinned with simple severity, Sir Henry followed, closing the door with a soft click that sounded, in the hush, like the closing of a trap. "Dear friends," Miss Marple began, her voice as gentle as the drip of icicles outside. "Thank you for coming. The snow has melted, the lanes are clear, and the time has come to lay one more ghost to rest. Colonel Haydock deserves that much." Griselda offered a tremulous smile. "A memorial reading, you said?" "In a manner of speaking." Miss Marple took the chair at the centre, arranging her skirt with care. "We shall read the truth together, line by line, until the whole sad page is turned." She lifted a small stack of papers, photostated pages from the Colonel's ledger, the county analyst's report, a single damson seed sealed in wax paper. The room was so still that the rustle sounded like gunfire. "Let us begin with what we know," she continued. "Colonel Arthur Haydock left this house at 5:15 on the evening of the charity tea. He drank hot chocolate, not wine. Within 20 minutes he was seen to stagger near the Lich Gate by young Tommy Price, who thought the Colonel merely tipsy. By 6 o'clock he lay in the snowdrift by the manor gate, dead of digitalis poisoning. The body was arranged, hands composed, scarf straightened, as though for a photograph. Someone wished us to believe in a tragic accident of heart and weather." Dr. Sanford cleared his throat. "I certified exposure following cardiac arrest," Miss Marple finished for him. "A conclusion any physician might reach, given the cold and the Colonel's history. Yet the pupils were dilated, the lips faintly blue, the pulse, when Briggs found him, already slowed to stillness. Digitalis, doctor, foxglove, a gardener's flower, and a murderer's friend." Sanford flushed. "I treated the Colonel with digitoxin for his angina. A natural confusion. Except the dose in his blood was 10 times therapeutic," Sir Henry interjected quietly. "The analyst's figures are here." He tapped the report. Miss Marple's gaze moved to the vicar. "Reverend Clement, you prepared the chocolate." Clement's knuckles whitened. "I did, but I swear—" "You are guilty of embezzlement, Leonard," Miss Marple said softly. "Not murder. £127 diverted from the memorial fund to repair the tower. The Colonel discovered it, confronted you privately, and offered restitution rather than ruin. You confessed to Griselda the night he died. She has confirmed it. Your hand shook as you stirred the pot, but with shame, not malice." Griselda gave a small broken nod. Miss Amelia leaned forward. "Then who—" Miss Marple turned to her. "You, my dear, were seen near the manor at 6:30, gathering holly. The postman waved. You waved back. Your inheritance was threatened. Yes, the Colonel spoke of altering his will, but you loved him. You argued affectionately over the fund, nothing more. The holly branch used to brush away footprints was yours, discarded innocently. The murderer retrieved it later." Amelia's shoulders sagged with relief. "Dr. Sanford," Miss Marple continued, "your debts are real. White's Club, 1,000 guineas. But the Colonel held your notes and intended leniency. Your stained glove was ink. Mrs. Price's prescription confirms it. You were at the Red Lion by 7, treating Briggs to a pint for finding the body. Alibi solid." Sanford exhaled, a man reprieved. "Briggs," Miss Marple said kindly, "you were sacked unjustly. 30 years' service for a few cuttings. You discovered the Colonel already dead, panicked, and said nothing of the mug print beside him. Fear, not guilt." The old gardener mumbled, "Didn't want blame, miss." "Which leaves Mr. Pettigrew." Every head swiveled. The shopkeeper attempted a bluff laugh. It emerged as a croak. Miss Marple laid the damson seed on the tea table like a chess piece. "You brought preserves to my cottage yesterday. Cherry decanted a spoonful for toast. The seeds floated, coated with digitalis residue. Your London wholesaler sells foxglove extract as vermin control. The Colonel's ledger notes inflated invoices, tea, sugar, biscuits for the committee, all charged to the fund, profit split with your accomplice. When the Colonel threatened exposure, you acted. Pettigrew surged to his feet. Lies. I never. Sir Henry's hand rested on his shoulder, gentle but immovable. Sit down, Harold. The boots you wore that night, size 9 nailed heel, are at the station. The spacing matches the half-brushed prints. The mug print in the snow is from the vicarage kitchen. Griselda identified the chip on the rim. You followed the Colonel, watched the poison take hold, dragged him the final yards, and staged the scene. Pettigrew's bravado collapsed. He sank back, face grey. He'd have ruined me. The shop, my good name, everything. I only meant to sicken him, make him forget the audit. The dose. I misjudged. Miss Marple's voice remained level. You misjudged more than dosage, Mr. Pettigrew. You misjudged the village. We are small, but we notice. We remember who shortchanged the war widows, who slipped an extra ounce into the sugar bag when backs were turned. Greed is a heavy burden. It leaves deep prints even in soft snow. Silence pooled, broken only by the drip of melting ice from the eaves. Reverend Clement stepped forward, eyes wet. I will repay every penny, Miss Marple. The tower can wait. Dr. Sanford removed his spectacles, polished them, replaced them. I'll settle my debts honourably. Amelia rose, crossed to Briggs, pressed a small purse into his gnarled hand. For your wife's window box, plant whatever you like. Sir Henry signalled the constable. Pettigrew was led away without struggle, his Sunday suit suddenly too large. Miss Marple stood. And now a proper memorial. Griselda, might we have the elderberry wine? The Colonel abstained that night, but today we shall drink to his memory, and to honesty, which thaws even the hardest heart. Glasses were filled. Outside the church bell tolled the hour. Rooks wheeled against the pale sky. They raised their cups in unison. To Colonel Haydock, Miss Marple said, who taught us that charity begins at home and ends only when truth is served. The piano lifts into a gentle hymn-like phrase. Sunlight strikes the war memorial across the green, setting the bronze soldier aglow. The company drinks, the room warm with forgiveness and the faint sweetness of elderberries. Miss Marple returned to Charing Cottage as dusk gathered. Cherry had laid a fire and set out seed catalogues. Spring was not far off. Sir Henry lingered on the step. You'll stay for supper? Miss Marple asked. Alas, the yard calls. But Jane, he took her hand, you have given the village more than justice. You have given it back its soul. She smiled, eyes twinkling. Merely reminded it where it was buried, Sir Henry, under the snow, like everything else. All one needs is a little warmth. He motored away into the twilight. Miss Marple closed the door, picked up her knitting, and listened to the thaw singing in the gutters. Another puzzle complete, another scarf begun. Human nature, she reflected, was remarkably like wool. Tangled, but with patience it could always be unravelled and respun into something useful.